Hi there. Welcome everybody to CloudSec 2021. My name's Mick McClooney and I'm the tech lead across Australia and New Zealand for Trend Micro. And I'm here today with Kelly Griffin from AWS in Sydney. Hey, Kelly, how are you?
I'm very well, Mick, and thank you very much for having me.
It's our pleasure. So I'm here today with Kelly to talk about essential security for cloud native deployment. And we've summarized it into 5 things we think you should review. This is a very high level overview of some key points around cloud native development. So we're going to go through what we think are some of the key themes around cloud posture and compliance, some vulnerability managements, because they're not going away, how containers seem to be a bedrock of cloud native deployment now, and what you need to think about in terms of container security. Template scanning and infrastructure as code is also very relevant and a major topic in terms of cloud native development. And finally, what about the code itself and how we can secure that? So with that, I'm going to talk to Kelly about all of these issues one by one. So Kelly, great that you're here with me today. So let's start off with cloud native development at a high level. What sort of trends are you seeing generally with customers as they move to more cloud native deployments? And what are the features of those?
It's really interesting, actually, because, you hit the nail on the head before with those 5 things that, we're going to sort of touch on today. Containerization is absolutely huge, right? So if we look at the birth, if you like, a few years ago of containerization, and it was really just the sort of the developers and stuff like that just playing around. We're now actually seeing, cloud native applications or future applications always running and living and breathing in containers. And, gone are the days of, server sprawl. We're now seeing container sprawl, which is huge. So, that's definitely a theme. Everything's being deployed by infrastructure as code, right? So that's kind of a first sort of class citizen now. Serverless as well. Everybody is breaking monolithic applications down into microservices. So there's that sort of stuff as well. But with all of that, I suppose adoption and movement around serverless and being able to develop and manipulate code on the fly, so CI/CD pipeline integration, stuff like that. We're now starting to see, exploitations of that sort of stuff. We're now seeing, security measures that need to be adopted, that need to be sort of matured as well, but then having an evergreen aspect around security, compliance and management and stuff as well. So lots of different things that are going on in the industry at the moment, and they have been for quite some time. So it's really, really exciting.
I think absolutely exciting, very powerful developments in terms of what you can get done. I think so. To come back to the key thing there of what you said, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of services being used. So let's just talk about visibility first of all.
Yeah,
I think we think about how do you get the visibility and whether you're well architected, and we talk about cloud posture. So what's your view on the dashboard, if you like, of where you're at?
I love this, right? So, the first thing that we always sort of talk about is being well architected. And if you talk to anybody from AWS, it's always about being well architected and our well architected framework and so on and so forth, right? So it's about looking at the best practices and aligning to those. The challenge there is it's not just a one-time thing, and neither is the cloud. And so because the cloud is so diverse and agile and, elastic and all of that sort of stuff, everything changes all of the time, right? So the challenge is that being well architected isn't just a one-time thing. So if we think about, posture management, for example, that isn't going to be a one-time thing either. So if you compare that, I always sort of compare this to like personal hygiene. So it's probably the easiest way of explaining it. Is, you don't just put deodorant on once, right? And that's it. You do it every single day. Sometimes you change it, sometimes you need more. And it's the same as security, right? So you need to ensure that that security hygiene is maintained and it's it's ever progressing, and it's adaptable as well to how the infrastructure or your business objectives change, or some of the services that you're utilizing change as well. So it shouldn't just be a one thing, one size fits all or a set and forget scenario anymore.
Fantastic. So I think what we're looking there is getting the visibility you need across this very fast changing environment, and then having an idea of how mature you are, both with regard to well-architected frameworks, for instance, but also then maybe other compliance standards that you need to comply to. APRA, this kind of.
Absolutely right. So if you can get, really quick observability into how you're aligning to some of those other frameworks, or how you're, what sort of gap or what sort of, I suppose, maturity you are against those frameworks as well, then you've got a reference point of being able to very quickly change and adopt, the type of service security posture that you need to adapt to make sure that you are closely aligned. But then also, if you start drifting away from that, right, if you don't have that observability, how do you know? So, having that continual dashboard view about, okay, my infrastructure's drifted, but you know what, size my security posture has drifted as well. So now let's start bringing that back as well. So that's that evergreen aspect to it as well.
Fantastic. So first thing to think about, tooling for visibility around your,
absolutely,
and whatever that looks like. Okay. So then we did talk briefly about vulnerability. So they are not going away. We find more of them. I was looking at some stats the other day of in the CVE database of the 190,000 there's something like 54,000 that are high or critical. So it's really, it seems to be an unwinnable war. We need some visibility around what vulnerabilities turning up in our code. How's your view of that? What's in practice at the moment with AWS customers?
Oh, look, it's really interesting, right? So if you hit the nail on the head again with some of that around, it seems that those vulnerabilities and those exposures are just changing more, right? So we're always on the chase of those and the attack as well. But it's really crucial, right? So if you look at the vulnerabilities that we've got today, we weren't exposed to last year, and those exposures that we're going to see next year, or the vulnerabilities that we see next year, they haven't been exposed yet, right? So and when we look at coding and looking at things like open source and stuff like that, it's a really great area, don't get me wrong, but you need to make sure that the code that you're using is trusted, that you know about it, and thinking about things, like how well versed you are on those security practices as well. So having a clear understanding.
I suppose the other thing is that's just the code you wrote, but most of the code you use, it's not the code you wrote, and it was written some time ago and seemed to be safe yesterday, but suddenly has a vulnerability today, right? So very challenging.
Completely agree. Absolutely. Like we see that a lot in not only the code that you're utilizing or the code that you've written as well. So we see a lot of, some of the challenges still today around like keys and, vaults and stuff like that. So, having access keys or credentials and stuff like that still being leaked out of code that you've actually written. And if that then gets exposed out to some sort of repo somewhere in the public, you've now exposed your whole environment. Now, the challenge, one of the big areas that we see within the cloud space as well is when a customer says, "Oh, but that's just my dev account." Here's the biggest challenge. Your dev account is still a public account. It's still an open account within a cloud platform, right? So having the same security boundaries and controls, and then the vulnerability assessment, and then really targeting inside that code as well, and having that security harness around everything that you do is crucial. And again, you need to be able to uncover those vulnerabilities very, very quickly. So having that scan inside your code, having that dynamic scan down the future track as well. So really getting very clear understanding about where the vulnerabilities are, but then as new vulnerabilities get exposed, again, making sure that you're keeping track of those as well. And if you think about things like containerization, it's even more critical.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's funny. That's my dev account. It's probably a CISO's nightmare. That
Percent.
trying to control, have visibility across all these accounts, and they all need to be secure.
They
Right.
do.
So again, we have some view of vulnerability management within your environment. Get some sort of capability to see what those vulnerabilities are, so you can react and respond to them.
Yep.
That's the key thing there. So
one thing I just want to add there as well is build those security practices into the code development. So it's not an afterthought. It's not something that you've done later on, right? So if you've got open source code, for example, do the scanning as you're writing it. So that way it's built into your practices. It's not just an afterthought where we're just like really quickly just chucking in a whole bunch of security stuff that then fails. Then you have to rewrite code again.
So you scan it in your IDE, in your development environment itself.
That's right. Absolutely.
So get it really, and I suppose that's what people mean by shifting left or starting left.
Absolutely.
Start with coding and security. Fantastic. I think we did mention containers. I think it relates strongly to the vulnerability side of things. If I lay out a scenario of, like I say, a container yesterday was fine, today it's got a major vulnerability. So there's a whole control mechanism there. You kind of need to know that container now running production code in production has a major vulnerability. What are you going to do? What's that scenario? And maybe that's something you've come across or you've advised people.
I have, absolutely. I'm really passionate about this area because I still see huge gaps in how customers are trying to protect or are protecting their container platform. But you really need to think across, think about protection across your build, deploy, and your run of your containers, right? It's not just about, I've got this container that's now running inside my either Docker environment or my Kubernetes environment. That's fine. That's the end state. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's happened along the way. And then conversely, yes, you've got something that's running, but what's running as well? So if you think about like your container image, that's probably your first thing. Where did you get it from? Did you make it or did you download it from a public repo? Secondly, how do you know really what's on that image as well? Like, are you signing that image, for example? And then thirdly, when you deploy that image, does it have those services running that it shouldn't have, right? So if you think about it like a base container, from my experience anyway, they're quite open, right? So when you deploy a base level of Ubuntu, for example, that's running a container, it could be quite open. There could be quite a number of services that don't need to be running on that. So you need visibility inside that container to ensure commands or files and stuff like that are either being allowed to be executed or aren't allowed to be executed. And then fourthly, we typically deploy, 1 image or 10 images. We're deploying lots and lots of images. I mentioned before, we've got container sprawl, right? So having that central management from a container posture management is really, really crucial. Because again, remember the vulnerabilities that we have that sort of come tomorrow definitely aren't exposed yet, but I can guarantee you that they will be.
Absolutely. And that's just the containers themselves. So let's not forget that Docker infrastructure or that infrastructure could also be vulnerable. So you have to keep your eye on that one as well. Cool.
Absolutely.
So again, a third thing to think about there is containers. If you're running them, what's your visibility? How are you controlling that environment? And what's running the container? Is it what you want to run? Are those lockdown images?
100%. Yeah, 100%, right? So like, are you sure that what is running inside that container is exactly what's running inside that container? Now, if you've got no visibility inside that container, how do you know? Right? So conversely, how do you know that somebody hasn't SSH'd into that container because lovingly you've left it open, or somehow there's been a vulnerability that's been exposed and somebody's now in that container that's now just executed a whole bunch of scripts? Right? So if you don't have visibility into that environment, you don't know.
Absolutely. And to go back to the SSH thing and the previous visibility tool of, is SSH open to the world on that container, right? So, that's a big red flag.
Big red flag.
So we've talked about visibility, vulnerabilities, and containers. I think I wanted to talk briefly about infrastructure as code. It's become a very key part of cloud native development. it's very powerful, and
Yeah, it is.
probably easy to get wrong, right? How, what would you advise around infrastructure as code going live and checking that?
Yeah, definitely. So this is a really, really cool area, but it's actually probably one of the most overlooked areas in terms of security management or posture management. And again, visibility and observability, right? So if you can imagine that you've got this infrastructure as code template, it's ready to deploy infrastructure. Perfect, right? That's best practice. It's what we want to do. It's a declarative state of infrastructure that's going to be deployed. It's exactly the way we sort of intended it to be. Challenge though is that inside that template, you've accidentally allowed a security group to be completely open, right? You've put in a rule that you go, yeah, I'm just testing this in my own environment and it works, fantastic. All right, I'm going to close that security group. Problem is you forgot to close that security group. You deploy your template, it works, which is normal because it's a declarative state of infrastructure, so it should go. But remember that vulnerability is wide open. Now, you don't know that you've done it. You can't see the vulnerability. According to the infrastructure tool, it worked. It's been fine. So now what you do is if you sort of take a step back and you go, okay, before we deploy these infrastructure as code templates, whether they be, CloudFormation, et cetera, or, Terraform, for example, you want to make sure that you've scanned those templates up front as part of your deployment process. So that way you can maintain some level of compliance by ensuring you can see those risks before they're actually deployed. So it's, again, we come back down to this visibility theme. So again, just making sure that, the code or the infrastructure that I'm going to deploy meets the requirements that I set. And I have those overarching governance themes as well that, yeah. And again, I've got the visibility to say, oops, I'm about to deploy something that I shouldn't.
Fantastic. So just make sure you're scanning that infrastructure as code before it goes live as real infrastructure.
Correct.
IAC, really very powerful, repeatable, reliable, very cloud actually in that sense, but in that powerful sense, also possibly easy to get wrong. So just have a check. So
absolutely,
a checking tool for your infrastructure as code. And then finally, I think I wanted to touch on the final theme, which was I labeled it as securing your code on the slide. I suppose a part of me meant serverless. I mean, if you take cloud native development or deployment to its ultimate, you're trying to rely on as many cloud services as you can, but you still have a line of responsibility, right? There's still a shared responsibility model for the code that you write and the bits of infrastructure you're using. And you still need visibility, you still have risks. So I was thinking, in that ultimate model, what's your view there on how you get that visibility within the code and what's running, what sort of real-time capability can we get within code?
Yeah, that perfect, right? So, just because you're not running those servers doesn't mean that you don't have risks. But again, without that visibility and detection, again, like how do you know, right? So the idea being that here is that we need to ensure that that application stack, regardless of where it runs, is protected. So far we've covered all the infrastructure elements, but ultimately it's the application that we need to protect ongoing as well. So it's even more so in serverless environments because that application stack, in theory, if we're running cloud native and we've got the practices and the culture in the organization behind that, we talk about DevSecOps and stuff like that. It's about culture and it's about the tools and the process. That application is going to consistently change. Right. So as you develop your overall application, things like SQL injection, file access, potential payload manipulation, all of these things happen in the background. So you need to know about those sorts of things. You need to know that those type of events or behavior are trying to happen against the application. And once you know that it's happened, respond accordingly. Better yet, if you've detected an attempt, but nothing happened, that's even better, right? Because it's detected this event and it's going, oh, that I know for a fact can't happen. I'm not allowing the behavior of that SQL injection, so I'm just going to block it instantly.
Absolutely. Okay, so in a serverless environment where you've got the code, still think about protecting the code itself. What can protect you in the way that code runs, and the way to make sure that it's not running, not attacked or not running maliciously.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you very much, Kelly. I think we've covered the areas that we said we're going to cover. We've given the audience probably 5 things to think about. Then think about your compliance and your cloud posture and the visibility you're getting over your whole cloud environment. Think about the vulnerabilities that you still need to manage, no matter where you are in that cloud native deployment journey, because they're all. We talked about the importance of container security, what's running the containers, what's in the containers, the visibility of the containers. We talked about infrastructure as code and how powerful that is, but perhaps have some template scanning to run against that before it goes live with potential mistakes. And finally, we talked about how you might secure your code.
Absolutely. A lot to cover there, but yeah, we've been a very short, sharp time. It's great.
Well, I think, fundamentally, we've perhaps given you these 5 key things to talk about. I think you'll find that AWS and Trend and AWS have guides around where you might be on some of these topics. And I believe that AWS are very keen on educating people around security and cloud native development, and have a number of tutorials and areas to help you understand as well.
Absolutely. Look, better together. We will absolutely here to support and secure your platform and your application stack moving forward.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Kelly, for our fireside chat, and I hope to see you again another time. Thank you for coming to CloudSec 2021. We do hope you've enjoyed this session, and we hope you go on to enjoy many of the other sessions in this track. Thank you very much. Right, I'll stop recording.